Once a year here at DW, we give out our Freedom of Speech Award to honor those who promote freedom of expression and human rights. And this year's winner is Tamar Kintsurashvili from Georgia in the Caucasus Mountains. The trained journalist is head of Tbilisi-based Media Development Foundation and has been fighting fake news, hate speech and propaganda in her home country.
For more than a decade, Tamar Kintsurashvili has been teaching how to distinguish facts from lies. But her work and her convictions could soon land her in jail. In Georgia, foundations like hers that receive funding from abroad are by law required to register as foreign agents or face financial penalties. Those penalties will soon be replaced with prison time. Tamar refuses to abide.
Goal of this legislation is to undermine trust in our actions. You need to have credible information in order to make right choices. This is how democracy works, and information is power, and powerful institutions, governments, autocrats, some business interests are trying to manipulate public opinion.
The so-called foreign agents law has triggered mass protests, as did an announcement by the Moscow-leaning government party that it would put the country's EU accession on hold. Additional legislation that restricts the media and political activism is in the making and could enrage tempers further. Tamar has seen volatile times in her country before. Born in 1970, she worked as a journalist after the fall of the Soviet Union, but never has she felt under pressure like now. She says masked men have repeatedly defaced her group's officers, labelling her and her colleagues as pseudo-liberal fascists.
And we were receiving offensive calls, including during midnight. They were swearing at me. They reached my family members, my husband, my daughter. On a daily basis, you learn that government tries to invent something new to stop you.
So for Tamar, international support is crucial. She's currently in France on a fellowship where she regularly meets with human rights defenders from all over the world.
We're working on media freedoms, disinformation and hate speech. Right now we have existential threat to survive in the framework of new foreign agent law.
She's planning to return to Georgia afterwards and says DW's Freedom of Speech Award has boosted her morale.
It gives you a feeling that you are not left alone against this oppressive government, and this is a message that we're doing important work for our country and for better and democratic Georgia.
Together with other activists, Tamar has launched an appeal against the foreign agents law at the European Court of Human Rights, determined as ever to stand her ground against an increasingly repressive government.
All right, let's hear more about this DW award and its latest recipient now from the head of DW. Peter Limbourg is the Director General of DW, and we call him boss around here. Glad to have you in the studio, Mr. Limbourg. So undoubtedly, there were a number of remarkable nominees in consideration for this award. What made Tamar Kintsurashvili stand out?
I think Tamar is a very impressive person. I've met her last year in Georgia, and she's doing a lot for press freedom and media freedom. All the nominees were really good, but I think it's also an important sign that we don't leave people alone who are fighting for the values also DW stands for. That's democracy, that's freedom of expression. And Georgia is in a very difficult position with a government which is really working against free press, which is trying to control everything and bring it into a sense which is a pro-Russian directive. So I think it's somebody who is really working for a long period. She's doing this media literacy, her work. She's doing this for a lot of years, and I think it's worth recognition.
How significant would you say is courage in this award and in the way the Freedom of Speech Award was granted?
I think courage is essential, and it's admirable to see how people, because it's sometimes for us, we are sitting in a relatively safe place, and we can talk about press freedom and freedom of expression. But these people, and Tamar also, she gets threatened regularly. She risks a lot, her family, and we see this around the globe. Journalism is getting more and more under pressure by autocrats and by other forces. Criminals, clans, whatever, it's getting more and more dangerous for journalists, and it takes a lot of courage. And I think it's important to show that we recognize also this courage.
And I do want to talk about that, but then let's talk a bit more about Tamar first, because beyond her role with Georgia's Media Development Foundation, something that DW supports financially, she's also head of something called Myth Detector. How important is something like that in the times that we live in?
I think it is very important to do fact-checking and to bring in the discourse, which is dominated by social media and a lot of fakes and falsifications and propaganda, disinformation is around. It's important to have institutions who are really working on this. And we as DW do this also with a fact-checking unit, but it is very important that this happens also locally, and it's not only international media doing it. It's important that it happens locally, because there's also a lot of trust into local organizations. And I think this is something which is important. And I think it's also important to see it's not the question that we think we should oppress some kind of opinion. Mm-hmm. It's the question that we have to stick to facts, and facts are not something which we can just dispute on and say, well, this is I don't believe in this fact. Facts are facts, and I think this is important in this discourse.
Going back to something that you were mentioning earlier, this clampdown on journalists and freedom of the press globally, especially for Tamar in our home country of Georgia, and dare I say it, arguably in what was once the beacon of press freedom, the United States. How important is such an award in this year?
It is, I think, always important to cherish people who are working for the freedom of expression and the freedom of the press. And yes, it is getting more and more difficult, especially within the United States, but also that the United States is retiring, obviously, from its international media scene, like the presumably shutdown of Voice of America and the danger Radio Free Europe is in. So I think these are also moments where we as Europeans must try to step in, and also we cannot do all of this, but I think we have to get our act together and see that press freedom is worldwide so much under pressure that we have to invest more.
We are talking here, of course, also about authoritarian governments which are clamping down even further on press freedom, and these times seem to make the job easier for some of these governments. What does that mean for journalists moving forward? What is it that they are up against?
I think they're up against a worldwide phenomena where autocrats who are working together, who are also working together in trying to block freedom of expression, trying to block, for instance, international media like DW or the BBC or France Médias Monde. And I think it's a worldwide phenomena. And the most important thing, I think, is to interconnect the journalists who are working in this field and to show that they're not alone. And this is also why we have this award, the Freedom of Speech Award, to especially show a light into maybe areas where not everybody's looking the whole day.
Is there a light at the end of what sounds like an increasingly dark tunnel? I mean, do you see more people like Tamar standing up and putting their beliefs and their faith in their work on the line?
First of all, I'm an absolute optimist. So I think there's always light at the end of the tunnel, and it's not always the train coming. So don't worry. I think it's something where we have to invest. If we just hope, it won't change. But we also have to invest in free journalism. We have to support people like Tamar. And I think at the end, I'm absolutely convinced that the freedom of expression and freedom at itself will prevail.
Peter Limbourg, DW's Director General, thanks so much for coming into the studio.
Thank you.